Jake Ulrich, whose experience in this car is not as good. Perhaps on this short circuit caused them problems. The TVR Chibira, certainly a car to keep an eye to, as are the Marcus. A whole load of Marcus cars here, and really showing that they're a big challenge this year. A rolling start, a compulsory pit stop, a change of driver, part and parcel. But you can, of course, if you want to drive the whole way through, make the compulsory pit stop and do it. And one man who has to do that is Win Percy, whose co-driver, the voluble Dane, unfortunately has decided to take no further part in the championship in 1996. Torquil tiring as we're aboard the Ian Jacobs Simon Tate Marcus, vying for position with the Chibira there. Jaguars are plenty, two of them in this field, the 220s. Charlie Cox returning to racing for the British Touring Car Championship in the Porsche. Charlie has got a lot of work to do. Alan Lloyd, who was the first man to drive a motor race in a 220 Jaguar some years ago, entered a car for the very first time that these cars ever raced, a couple of 3 years ago when they were brand new. As away they go over the line. And this has the makings of a very interesting race indeed. There's the McLaren in the lead. Flux, as we might expect in these first laps. Jacobs and Tate in 39, getting on with the job. And the field in these early stages of the race spreading out a little bit. There's still a fast train behind. That's the Ascari just ahead there of 33. The Mark Hales, Phil Andrews, TVR Chibira. And the Ascari also well worthwhile keeping an eye out for, as car number 11 goes through. That's Win Percy driving this race single-handed on his own with the McLaren in the lead then. Flux at the wheel at the moment, going through Paddock Bend and trying to build up sufficient advantage. The Mike Quaife, Graham Hathaway escort there comes past the Marcus and pulls away with remarkable ease. Quite a surprise that, but the car very handleable round Brands Hatch. The two Jaguars very close together there, running over a piece of debris in the middle of the track. That was 89 Timo Kennedy, Peter Matthews' car. Charlie Cox now carrying our onboard camera, with Percy making his way up through the traffic here, as befits a driver with this sort of experience, because Win Percy, of course, now ex-British Saloon Car champion, Jaguar driver at Le Mans. Certainly a man to watch, and in a sea of cars here, but sorts his way through past one of them, and I think we'll have another one on the way in. Yes, he does. And another one, I wouldn't be surprised, on the way up towards Druids the hairpin. Doesn't make it that time as he looks at the zero car of David Warnock and Rod Sherl, but it's not going to be very long before he's ahead of that one. And Percy, the man to watch in this field, moving very rapidly up from midfield. All the experience of this driver, who's now, shall we say, the other side of 50, being put into play in the traffic here as he nicks another place and gives himself some more work to do with some more cars ahead, which he's closing on now. So Win Percy driving a singleton race here. He'll still have a pit stop. Is going to be the man to watch, I would say, as this race wears on. The car and the driver had a huge accident in practice. The car's been repaired. The driver didn't require repairs, and certainly at this moment is driving as if he intends to put that well and truly behind him. The second Harrier, Valentine Lindsay, Richard Austin there, about to become the quarry of the first Harrier, as Win Percy has closed up with that group now. There's Percy up yet another place, past the Marcus, and his progress through this field is really quite remarkable. Yet another place as he passes the Austin Lindsay car. Under braking there, oh, the Marcus desperately in trouble. Being pressured very hard indeed. And now the Escort impeding his progress but slightly as he goes into Surtees. And Win Percy has got to be the man to keep the eye to. Sounds like a Win Percy benefit, I know, but out front there, the McLaren is going away, but not at the speed that we'd hoped. The Ascari, Klaus Schwartz seemingly not entirely happy. Behind him, the Chibira. This car, the second season in the championship, much quicker than last year. One of the Jaguars in trouble. This is 53, on its way into the pits. The Jeff Lister David Good car. And the 220s, which have proved fragile and not fast. As a wicked spin there, that's a rear suspension collapse on car number 2, which saw Mortimer and Blakely spin out into the kitty litter, work on the Jaguar. Well, it looks as if that's nothing to do with a pit stop for anything else other than a mechanical problem. 0. The Warnock Shell Marcus. 90. Going well. Ken Thomas, Frank Bradley with the Davrian. And that's a tyre gone on 39 there. Jacobs limping round, hoping to make it to the pits and hoping that that's not going to cause so much damage, because it's barely down now to the rim and the rear suspension won't be feeling too happy after that, nor the brake disc. Safety car comes out, as it well should do for a situation like this, as out comes the Porsche from the kitty litter. It wasn't a dangerous situation, and everybody who's worked out now that this is the time to stop could have an advantage, because after 15 laps you can stop. The Warnock car has taken advantage of the yellow flag situation. Remains to be seen how many other people have. Well, it doesn't appear to be that many have, so that could actually help them a great deal. They've got their changeover. As the Ascari goes through, Klaus Schwartz, another man who's driving this race single-handed, but of course it's meant that Win Percy, who had been making places as a result of his speed, has now made places as a result of the pace car and gets past the Chibira there, and I reckon is now in a very competitive position indeed. Percy comes diving down the hill there, and I'll be surprised if he's not in third place. Yes, he is. Win Percy in third place, really going remarkably well. The two Ferraris, Porsche, Jaguar still up with the leading pair, and 0 there, of course, the Warnock Shell car that has made its pit stop already. So making your pit stop at the right time could have been the great move. The Ascari has now been displaced by Win Percy. In comes the Chibira for his stop. This is Charlie Cox. Some gravel on the track there, that's what you can hear coming up against the wheel arches. Charlie gets it all wrong there, sideways everywhere, which way but lose, and has lost, ends up on the grass, and there is the leading McLaren. The leading McLaren with not far behind him Win Percy, and this does not augur well for the McLaren, who in the hands of its second driver, far less experienced, Ulrich, will not be as quick. John Grant's little Caterham in for its statutory pit stop and change of driver. General panic going on, but it's all orderly panic, if you know what I mean. And here is Win Percy now in second place and prepared to stay with the McLaren, and doesn't really need, I would have thought, to pressure too hard. As long as he can sit there, the pit stops, I believe, theoretically, will take care of the situation. The Ascari is in, looks to have a problem in the front end somewhere or other. They've got the bonnet up there, and there could be a longer stop for Klaus Schwartz than he intended it to be, as the McLaren comes round towards us. Win Percy just past a Porsche, and the Ascari comes out again after a longer stop, I think, than he'd anticipated. Klaus Schwartz out and round as a battling Marcus Porsche contest takes place. The Porsches always go well, but this is not perhaps their favourite circuit. This is the Ross Hyatt, Robert Nern Porsche, just ahead there of 0, the Warnock Shell Marcus, which you may recall was the car that made the very early stop. And that little bit of luck or a bit of good fortune or a bit of good thinking will not become apparent until towards the end of the race, when everybody has had their stop, which will of course in real terms take longer, since he made his under the yellow flag. Win Percy hard onto the tail now and challenging without any question the leader. There, the Chabira, which has gone well. Phil Andrews and Mark Hales, the Porsche coming in for his stop. And that looks like the McLaren. The McLaren coming in, Jake Ehrlich to take over. And this is the car that last year was in the Global Championship. Is run by substantially a very, very professional team. But Jake Ehrlich, whose car it is, has not had the experience that Ian Flux has had. Now, out front, when Percy makes his stop. Now, there's no change of driver, but it's not going to be anything that will gain in any way, shape or form for the singleton driver of the Harrier here, because the stop has to take the same amount of time. The McLaren, the push there is to help the clutch. The clutch is the one thing on these cars that can be a weak point as Ehrlich goes out. And with the major teams having made their stops now, we're beginning to see a pattern emerge as when Percy re-emerges from the pits. You can hear the punishment the transmission was taking as the tyre spun and Percy came out of the pit road back onto the track. And now we can get perhaps a far better view of what the situation is in this race, because the major teams have made their pit stops, and the one who's got the greatest advantage, the Warnock-Shirl Marcus, made his stop, I would explain, while the pace car was out, which would mean that in actual distance he would lose a lot less than everybody else has. So that sees the McLaren now on the same lap as Win Percy, but behind him, which he was not, of course, when the cars went actually in, because you recall that Ian Flux was leading. The door open there on the Porsche number 77, which can't help very much, but there you go. And that is the Chabira, which is going very slowly, and I wonder why. The Chabira pulls up by the marshal's post and stops. Consultation with the driver. Jaguar here being overtaken by Win Percy. Porsche being overtaken by Win Percy. As Percy now is chasing off after the Marcos, which has the lead. And that's the second of the Harriers that spins, the Valentine Lindsay Richard Austin car. And if you can find a space in the traffic, the Evesham Micros car gets back into the act. Well, the Chabira's back in the race. Whatever he stopped for, all's well that ends well. And there is the McLaren, which in the hands of Jake Ulrich has lost second place, as Win Percy is now up and in front of the Marcus and the McLaren and leads the race, as the Ferrari there, number 70 of Mark Peters and Ian Khan spins, is collected back together again and carries on. There is Win Percy in the lead, and there is the unhappy face of Ian Flux, biting his tongue, biting his lips, scratching his chin and wondering what can happen next. Can Jake Ulrich get himself back in front? Ulrich following the Marcus, but rightfully is taking a lot more care with that car. And then the Ascari has spun, and that's because once again a rear tyre has gone. The Ascari there has had a rear tyre go. The rear suspension has collapsed, in fact, and Klaus Schwartz has gone off. He was missed by the little Caterham, who could have so easily have got involved in that. But the Warnock-Shirl Marcus, with the yellow flag out, and I think probably another pace car situation coming up, yes it has, is ahead now of the McLaren as they struggle to get the damaged Ascari and all that damage caused when the rear suspension collapsed, and that car ejected from the race in its final stages. With now very, very few laps to go here, the pace car should be back in before the end of this race. which is led now by Win Percy. Win Percy in the lead. Thundering through comes the field now back up to racing speed. The Chabira seemingly fully recovered. The Escort still in there. Is going to be a finisher. The second of the Harriers too. But no question about who is in the lead, as up comes Warnock now, holding on to second place. Well ahead of the McLaren, which you just saw go through. The checkered flag is out, almost a lap ahead. Win Percy, a fantastic single-handed win in the Evesham Micros Harrier from the Warnock Shirl markers, Flux and Ulrich, Andrews and Hales and Chabira, Hathaway and Quaife in the Ford Escort. What a finish to a very interesting and very, very intriguing Privilege Insurance GT Championship. And there's Win Percy with the spoils of victory. The championship and class positions coming up. Ulrich and Flux still lead from Morrison and Greasley. Shirl and Warnock, however, lead the championship overall in their class from higher to learn. And then Clive Richards and Andy Purvis lead their class.